Today I'd like to show you a demo of Ansible Tower performing CI/CD integrated with GitHub. Now, lots of folks use Jenkins or another CI/CD pipeline tool, and that is totally fine. It's an excellent product. But what I'd like to highlight today is the capability already built into Ansible Tower to perform CI/CD activity without the need to deploy and maintain a separate product. What we're going to highlight today in this demo is we're going to mimic developer activity, developing a new feature or a new patch on a web application. We're going to check this code into GitHub, which is going to kick off a continuous integration job executed by Ansible Tower, where Ansible Tower is going to go out to Azure and provision some new test infrastructure for us. Tower is then going to re-inventory and dynamically source the inventory that's been created for us. It's then going to deploy this application and the new code onto that infrastructure and run a few unit tests. Finally, it's going to clean up the infrastructure and remove the servers that we've provisioned in Azure. And it's going to report back to GitHub the status of the code testing that we've done, or the unit testing that we've done. We're also going to mimic the behavior that a maintainer might take to review or potentially merge the code back into the master branch after the continuous integration tests have presumably passed. So in order to execute this continuous integration, continuous delivery workflow, I need to run you through some of the things that are happening behind the scenes in Ansible Tower. I've got an Ansible Tower server deployed and some basic credentials loaded into it. The notable one here that we'll be taking advantage of is the Azure subscription credentials. Also, next important here are the Ansible playbooks that I've pre-built to provision this web app test infrastructure into Azure, and then deploying the web app and running the unit tests on the new code that we'll be checking in. And then finally having a third playbook to clean up the infrastructure and remove it from the Azure account once we're done. Now, with the three CI/CD playbooks pre-built here, we're also going to use a workflow template within Ansible Tower to connect these all together. And I've created that here at the bottom as well. So opening up the workflow visualizer, what we'll see here is the playbooks going out to firstly provision the web app test infrastructure in Azure. We've populated our Azure subscription account details here to do a dynamic inventory update once the infrastructure gets provisioned. Once we know the infrastructure that's been deployed, we will use the second playbook to deploy the web app and the new code on top of it, as well as run some unit tests. And then finally, we'll clean up the infrastructure and update GitHub with the result of our continuous integration testing. Another prerequisite that I've included in Ansible Tower beforehand is adding the GitHub project for the web application into Ansible Tower as a project resource. An additional prereq that I'll show you is the Azure account, which we'll be provisioning infrastructure into. So in here, I've got a DNS zone, a storage container, as well as two images for a RHEL 7 and RHEL 8 hosts. We'll see these four resources for now, but as the tower kicks off the continuous integration jobs, we'll start to see this populated with more infrastructure. Another prerequisite, I've configured a webhook within the web app GitHub project with a pointer to Ansible Tower. So what this will do is it will send all of the events for the repository to Ansible Tower to take an action with. This is how we're connecting GitHub to Tower for the continuous integration unit tests which we'll be running. So we'll begin by mimicking some of the developer activity. So I've cloned the web application GitHub project into my local directory. You can see that I've created a very sophisticated web application here. What we'll do is we'll create a new branch for the patch or the feature that I'm going to write. And we'll go ahead and modify the code to add the new feature. Now this is obviously very rudimentary, but it'll give you an idea of the workflow for the continuous integration and the unit testing that we're going to do. And then we can scale up the sophistication of the web app and the unit tests once we understand the structure. So now that we've added the new feature or the new patch for the web app, I'm going to commit these changes. And then I'm going to push them to the repository. Now, as soon as I push them to the repository, the webhook is going to get activated, and it's going to send an event to Ansible Tower, which will kick off the continuous integration jobs. So I'll try to switch the windows fairly quickly here so you can see the workflow in real time. So we've pushed the code, and we see Ansible Tower here has done a source code update on the GitHub web app project that we've listed as a projects resource. And it's starting to kick off the workflow template that's going to run the 3 CI/CD playbooks that we've pre-built. So an SCM update happened. We synced the new code into Tower. We did an inventory sync for dynamically synchronizing with what infrastructure is existing in Azure. Right now it'll be blank. And then this web app CI/CD workflow job is kicking off the first CI/CD playbook there for provisioning the web app test infrastructure. Now if we jump into one of these playbook runs, we should see that the playbook has validated some credentials for Azure. It's done some basic sanitary checks, and it's gone and created a resource group, a storage account, a VNet, a subnet, and it's starting to create the rest of the infrastructure that we're going to use to test this web application. As we move over into our Azure account, we should start to see some of the resource groups and other resources start to populate as the playbook starts to create these resources here. Now we can see that the first playbook has finished executing, and we see that it's created an application VM that we're going to use for deploying the web application onto. So we see the provision web app playbook run completed now, and it's moved on to do another dynamic inventory update with the new infrastructure that's being provisioned in Azure. And it's moving on to the deploy web app playbook run that's in the workflow job. As we move over to the Microsoft account, we'll start to see that the virtual machine has been provisioned here for use in the deployment. What we should also see now, refreshing the GitHub repository, is a new branch and a new pull request will come into the workflow here. So a new branch has been submitted. So I'll create a new pull request for this feature that we've created. We'll do that here. Now, what we'll see is some continuous integration tests pending for the merging of this pull request. And so GitHub has sent an event out to Ansible Tower. Ansible Tower is provisioning some infrastructure for us to do some continuous integration testing, and it will come back to GitHub and update this check with its results. So moving back into Tower here, let's jump into the deploy web app playbook that's running. We can see this is registering the application host that we've created with Subscription Manager. It's installed some prerequisites for the application. It's deployed the application, and it's doing some other tasks here in the playbook to set up the app. Here we've got a unit test being run on the application, and I'll show you the result here. Again, this is very rudimentary. All we're really doing here is a URI. We're using the URI module to run a basic query against the web app to check if we've got a 200 OK back from the web server. Again, we can make this a lot more sophisticated with unit testing, but this should give you a basic idea of tests that we can run from Ansible Tower in a playbook. So moving along into the next job, Now that we've provisioned the infrastructure, we've deployed the app and ran the unit test, the remove playbook is now running and it's cleaning up all of the infrastructure in Azure that we've created. So here that playbook is deleting the resource group. And we should eventually see some of these resources that we've created in RG Tower CI/CD being deleted. So as I'm checking on the Azure account here, we can see more of the resources are being deleted as the playbook runs its course. So I'll just keep refreshing this for a few minutes and let it do its job. So we can see that the final playbook for cleaning up the infrastructure has ran successfully and finished. And so this completes the end of the web app CI/CD workflow. If we go back into the Microsoft account, we can already see that the resources here have been cleaned up and the account's refreshed. Moving over to GitHub, we can see that the continuous integration check has passed. So we've updated GitHub with the result of the unit testing that we've done. And now we can proceed to mimic some of the maintainer activity who might merge this request, having known now that the code is tested out okay. So now as the maintainer of the project, let's go ahead and merge this pull request. Now that the tests have complete, we'll confirm the merge and delete the feature branch. So as we go back to the code, and we can see that version 2 of the web application has been merged into GitHub. So to recap what we saw today, we saw a developer check out a Git project, create a feature in a branch, and commit it. The GitHub webhook then went out to Ansible Tower, provisioned new infrastructure for us, dynamically sourced the inventory, deployed the application to this new inventory, and ran some basic unit tests against the new code, and then finally cleaned up the infrastructure in the Azure account. The results of the unit tests got passed back to GitHub, which updated the integration tests that were listed in the pull request, and finally the maintainer, now knowing that the continuous integration tests for the application had passed, they were able to merge the feature with confidence.